to the Talent Optimization Podcast, the go-to podcast for CEOs and HR professionals wanting to bridge the gap between the strategy and tactical implementation of talent optimization within their organizations. Through interviews, predictive index, and personal experience, your host, Tracy Shirk, helps you discover the facets of talent optimization from both a CEO and HR perspective to truly create the dream team for your organization. Are you ready? Let's get started.
Welcome to the Talent Optimization Podcast. Today, we are chatting about starting 2022 in the best way possible. And with that being said, we are so excited that we are on December 30th. We are at the end of this year, and I want to celebrate it along with ensuring that we step into this new year in the best possible way with our staff. So with me today is Laura Eigel, and Laura is with us from the Catch Group, and we are going to chat about all things celebrating endings, starting beginnings, and driving through clouds. So Laura, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I cannot wait to dig into this topic. It's just such an important one.
I know. So I'm going to start with driving through clouds, and then we'll back into really great endings and how to start really great, even if the ending wasn't a great process, right? So with that being said, as I shared with you before we started chatting this morning, Laura, I drove home we have a cabin about 5.5 hours away, and I drove home from there this morning, and I drove through a cloud for about 3.5 hours, just total soupy. You can only see like 2 taillights in front of you, if that. And when they don't have their lights on, you come up on them and then the sonar catches you and slows you down. And I'm like, this kind of happens this way in business from time to time, where we get so focused with blinders on just seeing not even what's in front of us because we can't even see that. And then my internet wasn't working either. So I had no podcasts, no music, none of that stuff. So it was like, all the sensory things had gone. So when we think about that, I think it's such a great analogy for in business, how when we don't have all the things around us and taking that time to really go inside and focus on what is that thing that we're looking to create. So with that analogy, and I know we chatted a little bit about what that analogy is, closing out the year, opening ourselves wide open with those conversations with our staff for what the next year looks like. And I can't wait to hear your insights on this.
Yeah, I love that analogy. So driving through a haze, a fog, the clouds, like that's kind of how this time of year feels. Like you're just like, we're trying to close out the year strong. You might be ending your fiscal year. You might be in the middle of your fiscal year, but you are racing towards the holiday season, the new year. But very oftentimes we're in this very short term, very isolated spot where you don't see out, right? So I love that you use that as the analogy to start us off today, because oftentimes as we're closing out the year, we have a very kind of myopic view, a very short term lens to kind of finish it up. Let's get to our destination. But our world kind of feels smaller. What I hope that we talk about today is let's take a minute, let's pause, let's reflect, and let's open up. Let's try and get out of the cloud, right? Let's try and see through the fog. I'll give you a couple of tools, hopefully, to do that today. But that's really what we're trying to do. We have to elevate ourselves, reflect back, celebrate, and remember all of the amazing things that we did this year, because this year was a long one. I think we're still in this like COVID time warp, right? Like what was even this year? Yeah. Yeah. Like what was this year? What was 2020? What was 2019? It feels like it was 10 years ago. So yeah, so let's elevate out of the fog. And I'd love to chat about a couple of ways that we can do that, to pause, to reflect on the year that we have had. And then we can do that in a couple of ways, personally, and then also as leaders for ourselves and then for our teams. And usually that happens within like year-end conversations, right? Mm-hmm. Within our performance management processes. So let's talk about that a bit. And then also I'd love to, after we talk about closing out the year strong, how do we talk about setting ourselves up for success in 2022?
Absolutely. And I think some of this is you can drive through the fog, right? And that's through those conversations. And sometimes it's sitting the fog out and waiting for it to lift, right? So with that, we have on our podcast in the last couple of weeks talked a lot about how do we reflect on our year? What does that look like? And I'm really curious for your take on those year-end conversations. What do those look like?
I think there's the way they can look and what they generally look like, right?
True story.
True story. Which again, if we're in this fog, sometimes these conversations don't go as planned because we don't have a lot of time. We're not intentionally planning for them, right? And so as leaders, I'd love for us to think about this intentionally. First, setting up your own self for success. What was this year like? Spend some time to really brainstorm, actually look at your calendar, remind yourself what you did. If you had a mid-year process, you might not have even looked back since mid-year, where have I, made progress since then? So we want to take some initial time for self-reflection. And I think that's really in preparation for your own one-on-one. So first and foremost, as a leader in an organization, look at your own performance. What are ways that you can do that? Set some time out and literally just list out some of your bullets, right? What are my proudest moments? What are those big things that I set out to do in terms of my goals? Did I meet them? And what things did I learn along the way? And as we are prepping for those, do it in a brain dump. And then let's try to get it into a bite-sized kind of highlight format that really showcases almost like an executive summary so that you can really communicate that in a succinct way. And this is where I see some of these conversations fall flat, these year-end conversations, because you go in with this novel, right? It's I listed out all of the things that I did, right? But it's really hard then to have a meaningful conversation with your manager if they can't decipher and you can't concisely talk about what your big highlights were. So once you're able to do your brain dump, prioritize, and really focus on outcome first, right? So what I also see a mistake is somebody might write a lot of bullets about how they did something. They had 3 meetings to get to the strategic plan, right? And that's true. You did that. But I care more about the outcome. What was the strategic plan? What were those powerful words, right? That I created.
That difference between the output and the outcome, right? Yes. And so for our listeners, you've heard us talk about this in probably every other episode of the podcast. The outputs you need to get to what the outcome is, but that outcome is really what we're looking for. And as our listeners have heard me say probably 1,000 times, what are those business strategies that you're looking to create? And then what is that business outcome? And one of those key things is when we get to the end of the year is going back to what did we say at the beginning of the year or the beginning of the quarter that we said our outcomes were? And if we didn't hit them, Laura, I love what you said, which was maybe what we learned, because here's the deal. If we didn't hit an outcome, we learned something along the way. And we need to be able to take those learnings into the bite-sized pieces that you talked about so that the entire team can learn from those learnings so we don't make those same mistakes again, because mistakes are launch pads into our future success.
Yeah, I love that idea of talking about learnings to do things differently in the future. And that goes into the second mistake that I see people make. They don't talk about how they grew. So
absolutely.
So this is where, you're highlighting your personal growth, your leadership growth. You might have had an objective or a goal to say, I'm working on XYZ for my professional development, more executive presence, or communicating more succinctly to business partners, whatever that might be. But this is the stuff, and I think this is the gold really, in this idea of self-awareness around, especially these milestones that we did not hit, or these milestones that we hit out of the park. What was the differentiating factor of your leadership? Or what was the differentiating factor of your authentic style? And what I love for people to do is to think through, what is their style? How do they come across? What are their hip pocket skills that they're known for? As I talk and coach other leaders, The language that I use is values. And so what are your values? How does that show through your authentic leadership? So for me, I'm a developer. I love growing people. And so if I'm learning through the process or I'm coaching other people through the process, that might be something that I highlight. Hey, we missed the mark here, but the team grew in their capability in this aspect or in this aspect, or I grew as a coach because we worked through, these things that didn't work out. So we had to pivot, right? And so talking about that, but also being able to talk about it in the way that is authentic to you is another key differentiator that you can put into some of these conversations. But how did you grow? How did your leadership show up differently?
Yeah. And one of the things I love about this is it truly is a team conversation, because what happens is not one person can do it all alone. Every single one of us has strengths, and every single one of us has spots that are blind spots to us. It doesn't mean spend all your time on the blind spots, right? Mm-hmm. What it does mean is get a team together where everyone can play to their strengths, because your weaknesses are my strengths and my weaknesses are your strengths. And that way we can really elevate those things together. And so these year-end conversations, I look at it almost as 3 tiers. And I think you do as well from the conversations we've had. But we need to do the individual reflection, because that also opens ourselves up to be able to receive from others, right? Yep. And then we have the one-on-one conversations with individuals on our team. And then the third, and I almost put the third second, right, is that team conversation. And literally saying around, hey, what is it that you appreciated about another of reaching these outcomes this year? And as a team, how did we miss on this outcome? And what do we need? Then it opens the brainstorm, because sometimes we can't see where some of those geniuses are within ourselves that someone else can.
Yeah. And I love that you just talked about this idea of team conversation and reflection. So absolutely as a leader of your team, start with yourself for sure. And then communicate those things to your team, but then also have that broader team communication. And the last thing I would say here that people miss the mark on in general is just celebrating successes. Yes. We're in that cloud, right? We're in that fog. And often we do not, when we finally get out of it, we're just moving on to the next thing. We are not celebrating anything. We're not pausing. We're not reflecting. And then pause for celebration. But then, like you said, also pause for learning. We know that as HR professionals, if you actually debrief a critical experience, that's where the learning comes from, right? It's not just about on-the-job experience, but it's about that debrief. Like, what did we learn and what are we taking with us?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so I'm sitting here laughing a little bit. So we always bring in a third party. We call it a one-on-one talent strategy session, but we bring in a third party, and we do this for our clients as well. And one of those key things that came out of ours is we're not celebrating success. And so as I reflect that back and we chat as a team about it, and I say, well, how do we want to celebrate success? Everyone's like, I don't know. Like the shoulders go up and down. I don't know. So, in our team meeting that we have every week, we've got, what is the success that we want to celebrate? So what were those wins this week and how are we celebrating? And we're still like, I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to do it remotely too. We found, right. And sometimes even just like you said, giving the team space to reflect on the wins is in and of itself a celebration, right?
Yeah. And that's essentially where we've landed. It's like, well, we just talked about it. And it's like, I feel good that like we can share that now. I'm like, so does this feed it? Yeah, I think so. All right, great.
Yeah, it does. And sometimes that's all it is. Sometimes it's a personal note. Yes. To someone telling you the impact that it made on you personally. You can always do the gift card or the send somebody flowers or those kinds of things. But oftentimes it's the gift of time and individual attention that people are really just craving.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
But to your point, this idea of holding space weekly is wonderful. I love that you're doing that. And it sets the precedent. The other thing that it does, it's basically reinforcing the behavior of oh, these are the things that are important to us. And these are the ways that you're not highlighting the outcome. You're probably also highlighting the how you got there. And so you're basically giving positive reinforcement to the team on a habitual basis, which is exciting for morale, but it's also pointing them towards, okay, as we move in 2022, these are the kinds of things that we all feel are wins collectively.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so as we shift into this, let's kick off an amazing year conversation, whether it is as a team, individually, or one-on-one, what are some of those key takeaways that are really important to ensuring, one, individuals understand what the vision is, they understand the outcomes so that we're all aligned and marching towards that same goal?
Yeah, I think this idea of understanding strategic direction and what we're doing this year is imperative. So as a leader, it's communication. Do people understand where we're going as a team and then their impact of how we're going to get there? So how do I individually, what is my value to getting that goal? Right. So as we start out the new year, what is that strategic direction, that vision? Other people might call it annual operating plan. What are those team goals that ladder up to the organizational goals that I can then find personal meaning in? That is the connection, the piece. If the days that I'm wondering, why am I doing this? Or I'm confused, then I can find, I'm getting clarity, right? You're giving context, you're giving clarity.
And I think the other side of that is ensuring that they really understand. So I was leading a mentoring class or a mentoring program. And one of the things we kept talking about was communication. So if I say, hey, Laura, do you understand our mission? And you go, uh-huh. Versus, hey, Laura, can you describe to me what our mission is? Those are two very different questions because we can all go, uh-huh. Yes.
Yeah.
And not really understand it. But it's also ensuring we're not like two ships passing in the night, that we think we're on the same page and we're absolutely not.
Yeah. Or another question to build on that might be, what are you most excited to contribute to our team vision?
Yeah.
Or our team goals? Seeing their connection, like what is their understanding? That's a great one to like just check for understanding. And then just seeing what they're most excited about is also just another great way to figure out how to keep them motivated throughout the year. Another thing that I think is going to be really imperative here, you talked about the importance of vision, but I think it's also the how. And when I talk about the how, I go back to values. So what's important to us? How will we do that? I would take a minute and ground yourself back into the company's either mission or values if you have them. Some companies have very explicit mission statements and values, but like, what does that mean for the team? Sometimes it just looks like words on walls, but really that can be the heart and the soul of culture. I've gotten a lot of leaders that are saying, hey, can I really build culture in a remote work or hybrid work? And I say, yes. I say yes, because it's about these intentional moments and having these conversations that, okay, what are our values? What does that mean to you personally? And then also for each team member, what's most important to you right now? What values are most important to you? So is it connection? Is it curiosity? Is it growth and development? Is it achievement? Like, what are those? And just having those individual conversations with team members, but then aggregate that to a group discussion is really powerful as well. So then you have the vision of where you're going, but the values to guide you how to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. So anything else as you close out those conversations and ensure you have those, I want to say lampposts, but that is not the analogy I'm looking for. The fence posts to kind of look at throughout the year.
Yeah, I really think it's taking time, like you said, to get out of that fog, use that analogy from the beginning, set some intentional time, one for reflection from 2021, and then another separate time to connect on vision and values as an individual, and then teams to really have that conversation and to do it together intentionally so that they feel like they're part of the process.
Absolutely. And I think an important part of that reflection, you had shared, Laura, that you just got a Mac and you're switching over from a PC. And, you had asked me at the beginning, hey, do you have any suggestions? And I think one of those is not nexting from one year to the next year. And it's the same with not nexting from the old PC into the new Mac, right? That it is a very methodical process of saying, what do I intentionally want to bring over from this PC to this Mac? What do I intentionally want to bring over from 2021 to 2022? And what are those things that I just want to say, thank you for serving me. I'm going to keep you here. And that's something really important for each of us in celebrating a really strong ending and starting clean so that we can move forward. We're not taking all the garbage with us and choosing, hey, these are the things that are so important for us because they're going to get us to where we want to go.
I love that so much. And I resonate with that so much. It's like when you're moving houses, like, let's decide what we're bringing because we're not packing the things that we're not going to unpack, right? So I love that analogy. And sometimes it feels like, this end of year, beginning of new year, like we have to be perfect. We're going to do all of these things in the next year. And, this is just a point of time. You can do that reflection, this reflection and start new, really anytime. We all just do it kind of end of calendar year, beginning of next calendar year too, right? So this idea of refresh, it's not so all or nothing, right? So bringing in that mentality too. But I love that. What are you bringing into and what are you leaving behind that's not serving you anymore?
Yeah. And the gratitude for how it served you up to this point.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Absolutely.
It allows it to stay.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So as we close our conversation today, what is a takeaway that you have for executives listening in?
Absolutely. So I mentioned this idea of personal self-reflection. I think that as executives think about it, it really comes down to how am I showing up as a leader in my authentic leadership? So I really urge you to do that authentic self-reflection and to have these intentional conversations with your folks. Everything that you do, you're modeling for your teams. They're watching you. And if you are yourself, if you come across authentically, then it'll give them the permission to do that too. So I would urge you to reflect on what you think is authentic to you. And are you living those values?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And then what's that takeaway that you have for HR leaders listening in today?
Yeah, absolutely. I love all of the conversations that we've been having about performance management and end of year comments and like all of the things. And sometimes I think we get stuck on process, right? And we get stuck on, okay, you have to have your year-end conversations and what are your next year-end goals? But at the end of the day, I think if we can teach our people to just have really quality conversations and connections. So the advice that I would give there is to not get stuck on process, but to urge and coach your leaders to really focus on those one-on-one connections.
Absolutely. And so with that being said, thank you so much for being with us today. And as we kick off 2022, we're going to focus on mentoring for the month of January. And if you as an HR leader are looking for a mentor or a coach for you as you step into that, how are you being in this new year and how are you being in really creating that culture for your staff? We have a coaching program just for HR leaders inside of organizations. And this is a group program that's 6 months that kicks off in the end of January. So with that, thank you so much for being with us. And we hope that you have a fantastic rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Talent Optimization Podcast. You'll find more tools and resources for CEOs and HR professionals looking to bridge the strategies versus implementation gap of talent optimization at elevatedtalentconsulting.com. We've also created a free, valuable resource for you to begin bridging the gap called the Talent Optimization Foundation Membership Program. You can access it for free at elevatedtalentconsulting.com/foundation. Be sure to tune in next week for another episode to learn more about talent optimization and creating a dream team for your organization.